The last thing I heard before the snow took me was Grace's voice, my voice, saying my name to someone else. Not a whisper, not by accident. Clear and warm and perfectly practiced, floating back across the frozen ground like she had been rehearsing it for months. She had been rehearsing it for months. I tried to move. My hands wouldn't answer. The silver was already in my blood, burning through my veins like liquid fire. This wasn't a wound from a fight. It was a death sentence. Someone had decided I would not make it to morning, and they had planned it carefully enough to be right. One night. I had been one night away from everything I had ever waited for. I could see the council lights glowing warm on the horizon when Grace drove the blade in. I watched the lights blur as my knees hit the ground. The life I was supposed to walk into was right there, close enough to see, close enough to name. And Grace was walking toward it wearing my boots, carrying my documents pressed to her chest, with my name sitting in her mouth like it had always belonged to her. The mate bond went silent. Not dimmed, gone, like someone cupped their hands around a candle flame and squeezed until nothing remained. The cold came after that, fast and complete. I pressed my thumb against the back of the pendant still locked in my fist, the small dent on the lower left edge, the one I made at 14 falling off a fence, the one Grace had never known about. I held on. The ground shook. Not wind, not settling earth. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, moving toward me through the dark from the northern tree line. Too fast for an animal, too fast for someone who didn't already know exactly where I was. The cold should have finished me by then. It didn't. Something was coming. And the silver burning through my blood, which had been killing me quietly for the last 20 minutes, stopped. My wolf, weak and barely breathing, lifted her head. She knew that scent. She had never smelled it before in her life, and she knew it the way you know a word in a language you were born speaking but never taught. Deep, certain, like coming home to a place you have never been. Mine, she whispered. Then the dark took me. Roger had no reason to be on the eastern border that night. His captain said as much 3 days later, choosing his words carefully, the way men do when they don't want to question their alpha directly. The Eastern Patrol wasn't Roger's route. Hadn't been for 2 years. There were younger, faster wolves for that work now. Wolves who weren't already carrying the weight of an entire northern territory across their shoulders every waking hour. But Roger had been awake since before dawn, with his wolf pacing inside his chest like something caged and furious. Restless in a way that had no name and no clear cause. Just a pulling, a direction, an insistence that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with the animal he shared his bones with. At a certain point, a man stops arguing. He found her just before midnight, face down in the snow, one arm folded beneath her, one hand stretched forward, like she had been reaching for something when she fell. A southern pack coat, silver burns on both wrists in the specific pattern that only forms when someone holds a person completely still while the blade does its work, deliberately, patiently. Someone had taken their time. His wolf stopped pacing. For the first time in 10 years, it went completely, utterly still. The silence in his chest was so sudden and so absolute, it almost knocked him sideways. 10 years of constant noise. 10 years of his wolf pushing and pacing and searching for something it couldn't name. And then, nothing. Stillness. The deep, settled quiet of an animal that has finally found what it didn't know it was looking for. Roger crouched in the snow beside her. His mind ran through it automatically. Hypothermia, silver poisoning, blood loss, hours of exposure. But underneath all of that, quieter and more certain than any calculation, something landed in the center of his chest, like a key turning in a lock he hadn't known was there. Her scent reached him through the cold. Faint, fading, but unmistakable to the wolf suddenly pressing forward behind his ribs with an urgency that had nothing tactical about it. Mine. The word moved through him before he could stop it, before he could examine it or question it or lock it behind the discipline of a decade spent leading rather than feeling. His hands were already moving, turning her over, gentle in a way his general had never once seen him be with anything. Her hand was closed around a pendant, knuckles white, unconscious and still holding on. Something in his chest cracked open quietly. He picked her up. She weighed almost nothing against the cold. He tucked her against his chest the way you carry something you have decided you are not going to lose, and he walked back toward the fortress without once looking at the ground. Back at the gate, his general was waiting, with 3 territorial disputes, a trade negotiation, and a border report that couldn't wait until morning. Roger handed his coat to a guard, told his general to reschedule everything, and kept walking. "For how long?" his general called after him. Roger didn't answer. He already knew the Southern delegation had arrived 2 nights ago, every member documented and confirmed before the council elder. He had reviewed the list himself. Her insignia matched the delegation, which meant someone was standing in this woman's place inside the council hall right now, and this woman had been left in the snow to make sure she never showed up to contradict them. His wolf snarled at that, low and continuous, the sound of an animal that has located a threat and is deciding how to respond to it. Roger let it. There was something else nagging at him as he carried it through the fortress gates, something he had noticed 3 weeks ago at the last council summit and had filed away without knowing why. A man named Caden Voss, elder-ranked, 3 territories east, he sat at the back of the summit hall and said almost nothing for 2 full days, which would not have been unusual except for the way he watched the Southern delegation arrive. Not with interest, with the quiet satisfaction of someone watching something they arranged unfold correctly. Roger had noticed it, had meant to look into it. He looked down at the woman in his arms, at the silver burns on her wrists. He should have looked into it sooner. On the 2nd day, her fever spiked badly. The healer came to find him. He was already standing in the doorway, had been standing there for an hour, his wolf too agitated to let him sit anywhere else. On the 3rd day, just before dawn, her fingers tightened around the pendant in her sleep. He exhaled for what felt like the first time in 3 days. He stayed. What he hadn't told anyone was this. He had reviewed that delegation manifest twice. Her name wasn't on it. The ceiling was stone. That was the first thing. Elizabeth counted the cracks before she opened her eyes fully. An old habit. The kind you develop when waking up disoriented has consequences. Stone ceiling. 1 window, high and narrow. Door to the left. No sound of a lock. No guard breathing on the other side. She checked her body next. Both hands, both feet. The pendant, still closed in her right fist, the dented edge pressing into her palm like a small, familiar promise. Then the damage. Silver burns on both wrists, wrapped in clean, careful bandages. Ribs bruised, but not broken. Her wolf, when she reached inward, was there, but quiet, exhausted, like an animal that had run as far as it could go and was sleeping where it dropped. The mate bond was there too, muffled but present, like a voice speaking through a wall too thick to carry words. It pulled in a direction she couldn't name yet, somewhere close, somewhere in this fortress. Her wolf stirred at that, lifted her head, went still again. The room was warm, too warm for a prison. Elizabeth didn't trust it. The healer came first, a woman named Sarah, steady-handed and professional, who checked the burns without asking questions. She didn't need to ask them. Elizabeth watched the way Sarah glanced toward the doorway twice, the careful, neutral expression of someone who had been specifically told not to pry. Someone had given that instruction, someone who had already understood that Elizabeth would be reading everything around her for information. When Sarah left, Elizabeth moved. She found writing materials in the second drawer, plain paper, a small pot of ink. She sat at the desk with her burned wrists aching quietly and tore off the smallest piece of paper she could manage. 4 words. I am not dead. She folded it to the size of a coin. If she could find one person in this fortress with access to a southern courier. The door locks from the inside only. She hadn't heard him coming. She had felt him. 30 seconds before he appeared, the bond shifted behind her ribs with a sudden, sharp pull. Her wolf was on her feet instantly, ears forward, a low sound of recognition rising in the back of Elizabeth's throat that she stopped before it became audible. She had never felt anything like it. She didn't let it show. Roger leaned in the doorway. He was larger than she had expected, broader, the kind of man who takes up a doorframe completely without trying. He watched her the way a man watches something he has been thinking about for 3 days and hasn't yet found the right words for. His eyes dropped to the folded paper in her hands. He didn't ask. She didn't explain. He set a tray of food on the small table by the door. Warm and real. Then he stepped back. "There's a southern courier leaving at dawn," he said. His voice was low, quiet the way deep water is quiet. "If you have something to send." He left before she could answer. Elizabeth sat with the folded paper and her wolf pressing restlessly at the inside of her chest and understood that a man who offered her a courier was either exactly what he appeared to be, or he was reading everything that left this fortress. She pressed the paper flat, picked up the ink, wrote a second message on different paper with different words, because if Roger was reading her letters, she intended to be deliberate about what she let him find. The real message she folded into the hem of her sleeve. Now she needed someone to carry it. She moved to the window. The courtyard was quiet, 2 guards crossing at the far end. Nothing unusual. But on the low wall at the eastern edge, a single rider sat on horseback in the shadow of the gate, not moving, not leaving, not announcing himself, just watching the fortress. He had been there when she woke. She was almost certain he had been there the night before, too. She didn't know who he was, but she had spent enough years in a pack that taught her to be small and unnoticed to recognize surveillance when she saw it. Someone outside this fortress was already watching her, had been watching since before she was awake enough to watch back. She stepped away from the window. What she didn't know yet was that Sarah had already sent a message south the morning Elizabeth arrived. Someone down there already knew she was alive, and they hadn't come. The report arrived before dawn. A rider who had pushed his horse so hard the animal was still trembling when Roger met him in the courtyard. Roger read it, standing in the cold gray light, without sitting, without calling for his captain. Just stood there and read it. Twice. The Southern delegation's mate presentation had been accepted. The council elder had presided personally. The bonding ceremony was scheduled for the next full moon, 12 days. The presenting female was bark-haired, Omega-ranked, bearing the Ashford insignia, who had arrived with full documentation and completed the bond verification without hesitation. Bond verification. His wolf went very quiet and very dangerous. Roger set the paper on the war table with a care that had nothing to do with gentleness. His hand stayed flat against it. 3 full seconds. The single unguarded moment before the alpha locked back into place over everything else. Then he straightened. His captain appeared in the doorway. "Find out who she is," Roger said, quiet, the tone his men had learned to take very seriously. "The woman upstairs. Full family history. Everything her pack ever officially recorded and everything they chose not to." He paused. "And find out who is living her life right now." His captain left without questions. Roger turned back to the war table. 12 days. He pulled the second document from under the first, the one his captain didn't know about yet. A separate page, folded small, tucked inside the official report like someone had slipped it there between dispatch and delivery. No signature, no seal, just one line in handwriting he didn't recognize. Voss arranged the contract. The girl is the last of the Moonsever line. He cannot let her reach the council alive. Roger read it twice. Voss. The man he had watched at the summit 3 weeks ago, sitting quietly at the back of the hall, watching the Southern delegation arrive with the satisfaction of someone watching their own plan unfold. He hadn't moved on it quickly enough. He held the note over the candle and watched it burn. Then he went to the window and looked out at the eastern wall, where one of his guards had reported a stationary rider at the gate for the second morning in a row. The rider was gone now, but the report from last night said he had stayed until just before dawn. Watching. Roger turned back to the war table. Someone at the council knew Elizabeth was in his fortress, someone who hadn't told the elder, someone choosing silence and anonymous notes for reasons he didn't yet fully understand. And Caden Voss, who had arranged to have a woman killed in the snow to stop her bloodline from reaching the council, now knew that plan had failed, which meant he was already adjusting. He didn't hear Elizabeth in the corridor. He heard the absence of sound instead. The specific stillness of someone controlling their breathing, reading a situation completely before stepping into it. He recognized it, because he did the same thing. He didn't turn around, but his wolf turned. Every internal instinct swinging toward her like a compass finding north, immediate and involuntary. She stood at the threshold of the war room and read the report upside down from across the room. He watched her eyes track left to right, slowing on the numbers, stopping at full moon ceremony long enough to count the days herself. 12. Her hand rose to the pendant at her throat. Her jaw tightened. The look of a woman choosing to hold herself together rather than let anything show. The bonding ceremony. 12 days. Yes. She nodded once, turned, and walked back down the corridor. Roger looked at the ash on the candle where the note had burned. 12 days. A hidden ally who communicated in single lines and unsigned paper. A man 3 territories east who had spent 20 years building power with patience, and now watching his most careful plan from apart. And a woman upstairs who didn't yet know what she was. He needed to move faster. The captain returned at midday. Roger read the file alone. He was still reading it 2 hours later. 4 pages, dense with archive records pulled from sources that shouldn't have been easy to reach. He read slowly, each page landing harder than the one before it. Elizabeth Ashford, 22, Omega designation assigned at her ranking ceremony, age 16. Except the ranking records had been changed. His captain had flagged it with a single underline. The original assessment, buried 3 entries deep in a private pack archive, listed something completely different. Not Omega, the last documented carrier of the Moonsever line. Roger set the page down, picked it up again. The Moonsever bloodline hadn't surfaced in 2 generations. Most northern archives listed it as extinct. The quiet kind of extinction that happens when powerful things become inconvenient to powerful people. He knew the history the way you know dangerous things, in broad strokes, in implication, in the specific silence that fell over any serious discussion of it. A Moonsever wolf didn't simply carry a meat bond, she anchored one, deep and unbreakable, and so complete it could steady an entire pack's hierarchy, calm fractured alliances, end territorial disputes without a single blade drawn. The old records called her a cornerstone. The newer ones, written by people who had learned to fear that kind of power, called her something else entirely. A threat. He understood now why Voss had moved so carefully, why he had used Grace's father as a middle layer, why he had commissioned the blade 2 territories over through 3 separate financial channels. A Moonsever heir reaching the council and bonding legitimately would shift the balance of power in ways that couldn't be undone. Voss had spent 20 years arranging things so that certain balances stayed exactly where he needed them. One woman with the right bloodline and the right bond could unravel all of it. So he had simply arranged for her to disappear. His wolf snarled without interruption for a full 10 minutes. Roger sat with the file and let it. He understood now why her pack had buried the designation, why they had ranked her Omega and kept her small and grateful and convinced she was unremarkable. A woman who didn't know what she was couldn't use it and couldn't refuse to be used. He thought about walking down the corridor and telling her, played it through twice in his mind, found both versions wanting, not because the truth would break her, he was beginning to understand she didn't break easily, but because he had already changed her world once by pulling her out of the snow. He wasn't certain he had earned the right to do it again without asking. He was still sitting with it when Sarah appeared in the doorway. "She's been asking questions," the healer said carefully, "about the Northern Archives. Bloodline records specifically." A pause. "She asked me this morning why your wolf behaves differently around her than around anyone else in the fortress." Roger looked up. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing." Sarah hesitated. "But she already knows something is different. She's been knowing since she woke up. She's just waiting for someone to say it out loud." Another pause. "She's also gone." Roger was on his feet before the sentence finished. "She was in her room 20 minutes ago. One of the Eastern Guards just reported someone matching her description at the archive entrance." A breath. "The restricted archive, the one that holds the Moonsever records." Roger was already moving. She had stopped waiting to be told. She had gone to find it herself. The restricted archive had exactly one entrance, and if Voss had someone inside this fortress, someone positioned to watch and report and act if the situation required it, Elizabeth was alone in a room full of proof of exactly what she carried, with no idea who else might already be on their way. She woke at 3 in the morning with someone else's heartbeat in her chest. Not a sound, not a dream. A steady, slow rhythm that wasn't hers, sitting behind her ribs like it had always lived there and had simply been waiting for her to stop and notice it. Elizabeth lay still in the dark with her hand pressed flat against her sternum and felt it beat. Once, twice, 3 times. Her wolf was already awake, already turned toward it, making the low sound in the back of her throat that meant known and safe, and something else Elizabeth didn't have a clean word for yet. She got up. He was already in the corridor, not pacing, not pretending he hadn't been there for a while, just sitting with his back against the wall opposite her door, forearms resting on his knees, looking at the floor with the particular stillness of a man who has been thinking about something for a long time and has finally stopped pretending he isn't. He looked up when her door opened. His eyes found hers immediately, the way they always did now, the way she had noticed and catalogued and refused to examine too closely until this moment. His wolf was right there at the surface. She could see it. The amber that bled into his eyes when he stopped controlling it. The focused, complete attention of an animal that had located something it had been searching for without knowing it was searching. Her own wolf pressed forward at the sight of it, warm and certain and not even slightly afraid. Elizabeth sat down on her side of the corridor. The stone was cold. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "She woke you too," she said. "It's been waking me for 4 days." A pause. His voice was lower than usual, like something in him had stopped performing. "I didn't want to tell you while you were still deciding whether I was the enemy." "I haven't finished deciding that." "I know." She felt him through the bond now clearly, not like a sound, like warmth, like something that had always been meant to be close to her and had been missing so long the ache of it had become normal. She pressed her back against the stone wall and breathed through it. "What does it cost you," she said quietly, "to be what you are?" He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. He did. "Everything I do has consequences for other people," he said. "Every decision, every absence, every hour I spend on something personal instead of something territorial. I stopped making personal decisions a long time ago because being wrong lands on people who never chose to carry it." He looked at his hands. "I have not been wrong about very many things. I have been alone about all of them." Her wolf made a soft sound at that, something that felt like reaching. Elizabeth looked at the floor. "I have a scar on my right palm. I got it at 14, falling off a fence I'd been told not to climb." She paused. "My pack used it as evidence, that I was reckless, that I needed to be managed. I spent 8 years trying to be smaller than that scar." She touched the pendant at her throat. "Grace knew about it. She used to cover for me when the elders noticed. I thought that was friendship. A breath. I think now it was her keeping inventory. She stopped. Something shifted in her chest as she said it out loud. Not pain, exactly, more like something that had been held at a careful angle for years, suddenly being set down flat and seen clearly for the first time. She had not been small because she was small. She had been kept small because small was safer for everyone around her. That was the last time she intended to be kept. Roger was watching her. He had heard the shift in her voice. His wolf had gone very still in that particular attentive way. The dent, lower left edge of the pendant. She looked at him. He noticed it the first night, he said. He didn't know what it meant then. He did now. She could hear it and how he said it. Not casually, as a full acknowledgement. I see the specific thing that marks you as yourself and not someone else. I have been seeing it since before you are awake enough to show me. The bond settled between them. Not gone, not quiet. Settled the way a river settles after a storm. Still moving, just no longer trying to tear the banks down. His hand rested on the stone floor between them. Not reaching, just present. Open. She looked at it for a long moment. She placed her hand over his. Neither of them said anything. His fingers closed around hers slowly, carefully, the way you close your hand around something you have decided you are not going to drop. His wolf went quiet in her chest. She felt it through the bond, the deep exhaling stillness of an animal that had been pacing for 10 years, and finally stopped. A door opened somewhere below. Boots on stone, fast and purposeful. A guard appeared at the end of the corridor, saw them on the floor, kept his face professionally blank in a way that clearly cost him significantly. My lord. His voice was tight. The border, Eastern Watch just sent a runner. He paused. They found another body in the snow, Southend Pack insignia. Another pause. And a message addressed to the woman in your care. By name. Elizabeth was on her feet before he finished. By her name. Not the name Grace was using at the council. Her real name, the one no one north of the border should have known. Someone wasn't just aware she had survived. They knew exactly where she was the entire time. The report was 11 pages. Roger left it on the war table and moved to the window. Elizabeth sat down and read. The first page was logistics. Dates, names, coordination points. The ambush had been planned 4 months before they left home, before Elizabeth had even been told she was making the journey. The silver-laced blade had been commissioned from a weaponsmith 2 territories over, paid for in coin that traced back, through 3 careful layers, to Elder Ashford's household accounts. Grace's father. The man who had pressed Elizabeth's hand at the send-off and told her she was the pack's greatest hope. She turned the page. The second page was about Grace. Correspondence between Grace and her father spanning 18 months. The early letters were formal and obedient. The later ones were different. One, written 6 weeks before departure, said, "I don't know if I can do this. She trusts me." Her father's response was one line. "That is precisely why it has to be you." Elizabeth read that exchange 3 times. It didn't make the silver burns hurt less. It didn't return the 11 days she had lost. It didn't give her back the life currently being lived by someone else 12 days' ride south. But it meant Grace had known, had carried the guilt of it from the beginning, had chosen to do it anyway. That was somehow worse than if she had felt nothing at all. Elizabeth turned to the final page. The bonding ceremony had been moved. Not the full moon, 3 days from now. The council elder had approved the change at Grace's request, citing bond stability concerns. 3 days. They had been counting 12. Once that ceremony completed under council law, Elizabeth's claim dissolved entirely. A completed mate bond could not be undone. It didn't matter what bloodline she carried or what she could prove. Grace would be permanent. Elizabeth closed the report, folded it once along the original crease. 2 breaths. The specific pain of understanding that the friendship was real enough for Grace to feel the weight of destroying it, and not real enough to stop her. Then she put it down. She was done grieving what had been taken. It was time to take it back. Her wolf was steady inside her. Not exactly calm, steady. The difference between an animal at peace and an animal that has made a decision and is waiting for the moment to act on it. "I want to go to the council." Roger turned from the window. "I know," he said. "Tell me when." "Now." She was already standing. "The ceremony is in 3 days. 2 days hard ride. That leaves us 1 hour to prepare. I'll have the horses ready at dawn." "Roger." He stopped. She met his eyes across the war table. The bond hummed between them, warm and constant. "The unsigned letter, the body in the snow. Someone at the council knows I'm alive and hasn't told the elder." She paused. "When we ride in, we won't just be facing Grace." "No, we won't. Do you know who it is yet?" The pause before he answered was 1 beat too long. "Get some sleep," he said quietly. "We ride before dawn." He left. Elizabeth stood at the war table in the dark. She understood that he did know, had known since the unsigned letter, had been deciding for days what to do with it, which meant whoever was waiting for them at the council wasn't just an unknown threat. It was someone Roger recognized, and he hadn't told her yet. She pressed her hand flat against the table, looked at the maps, at the southern routes, at the distance between here and the ceremony closing faster than anyone had planned for. She looked at the pendant on the wall. She was not the girl who had been sent to the border as a quiet solution to someone else's problem. She was not the omega her pack had filed her at 16 to keep her small and grateful. She was not the body they had left in the snow. She knew what she carried now, and she intended to walk into that council hall and make every person in it understand that too. She took the pendant down and put it around her neck. 3 days, her wolf said. "Then we show them," Elizabeth answered. They rode in at mid-morning, with the sun at their backs and Roger's banner cutting against the sky. Elizabeth kept her eyes forward and her hands steady on the reins, and did not allow herself to think about what happened if this didn't work. Roger rode beside her, close enough that their horses occasionally touched. His wolf was at the surface. She could feel it through the bond, alert and pointed forward like a drawn blade. Not afraid, ready. The contained readiness of a predator that has already decided how this ends and is simply waiting for the moment to begin. She let that steadiness into her own chest and held on to it. The council hall was already full. Word travels faster than horses in political territory. Someone had known they were coming. The witness gallery was packed 3 deep when they walked through the doors. Every ranked wolf in the northern seat turned to look at the woman who was supposed to be dead arriving alive and unhurried, with the alpha of the north 1 deliberate step behind her. Elizabeth felt the weight of every stare and walked through it like it wasn't there. She found Grace before Grace found her. Standing at the front of the hall in clothes Elizabeth didn't recognize, hair dressed differently, posture carefully arranged into the person she had been pretending to be for 11 days. She looked like someone working very hard to appear at ease. Then Grace turned. The color left her face completely and all at once. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. For one unguarded moment, she looked exactly like the girl Elizabeth had grown up beside, standing in the ruins of everything she had built, understanding that it was over. Elizabeth kept walking. The elder stepped forward, 70 years old and iron-spined, the kind of authority that had never once been seriously challenged. He looked at Elizabeth the way a man looks at a problem he had been assured was solved. "This hall has already received and verified. My name is Elizabeth Ashford." Her voice carried across the hall without effort, clear and even and completely without apology. "I am the last carrier of the Moonsever bloodline. I was attacked at the eastern border 11 days ago with a silver-laced blade commissioned by Elder Ashford of the Southern Pack, whose daughter carried forged documentation into this hall in my name." She reached into her coat, placed the pendant on the stone floor in the center of the hall. It rang against the flagstone like a struck bell. Every eye in the room dropped to it. "That pendant has a dent on the lower left edge," she said. made 14 years ago. It is registered in the Ashford family records as belonging to the Moonsever heir. She held up her right palm, scar catching the light. Verify it. The elder looked at the pendant, at her palm, at the silver burns on her wrists that 11 days of healing hadn't fully erased. A younger council member stepped forward, sharp-faced, ambitious. A scar and a pendant prove nothing. The verification was completed. The bond, Elizabeth said quietly, never activated. The silence that followed had the weight of a verdict. Grace moved, not toward Elizabeth, away. One small backward step, the pure instinct of someone calculating exits. But she stopped herself, straightened, and Elizabeth saw something she hadn't expected. Not defiance, not desperation. Real grief. Raw and unhidden, the kind you cannot manufacture. It didn't change anything. It meant something anyway. "She's lying," Grace said. Her voice was steady. It cost her everything to keep it that way. "The bond activated the night I—" It hit Elizabeth like a wave breaking from the inside out. Not pain, not warmth, something that existed beyond both of those words, a force that had been building for 11 days behind a wall of silver and suppression and sheer, stubborn refusal to stop, suddenly finding no wall left to hold it back. She heard Roger behind her. One sharp, completely undone exhale, the sound of 10 years of empty ache becoming irrevocably, undeniably full. The mate bond detonated between them in front of every witness in the northern seat. It was not subtle. It moved through the hall like pressure through a sealed room. Every candle bent toward them at the same moment. Every wolf within 30 feet went instinctively, completely still. The deep animal recognition of something so precisely and completely right that the body answers before the mind has time to question it. The room filled with a scent like pine and cold iron and something ancient that had no modern name. Elizabeth turned to look at Roger. His face was open, completely, devastatingly open. The controlled alpha she had watched manage every room he entered for 11 days was simply gone. In his place was a man who looked like he had just been handed something he had stopped believing existed. His eyes were full amber, his wolf fully present, fully visible, not even slightly contained. He looked at her like she was the answer to a question he had been afraid to keep asking. Her wolf sang, not a small sound, not a careful sound, the full-throated, unashamed recognition of a creature that has found its missing half and has no interest in pretending otherwise. The younger council member had gone completely silent. The elder looked at Grace. Grace closed her eyes. "Enough," the elder said. His voice had changed. The authority remained. The certainty did not. "This proceeding is—" The doors at the back of the hall opened. Elizabeth turned. The man who walked in was no one she recognized, but Roger went absolutely rigid beside her, the stillness of someone who has just seen exactly what they feared they would see. His hand found her arm before she could ask why, pulling her back half a step, putting himself between her and this man before the threat had even been named. She felt his wolf through the bond. Not afraid. Furious. The cold, deliberate fury of a predator that has identified the source of the threat to what it is protecting. "Who is that?" she said quietly. "The person," Roger said, very low, "who paid Grace's father to arrange the contract." The man walked to the center of the hall without hurrying, calm, pleasant, completely at ease. The confidence of someone who had prepared for this exact outcome and was not remotely surprised to be here. This was not a man who had been caught off guard. This was a man who had watched his first plan fail and arrived with a second one already in motion. He looked at Elizabeth with the careful, measuring expression of someone who has been studying a subject for quite some time and is finally in the same room with it. He smiled. "Congratulations," he said to the hall, "on resolving the confusion." His eyes stayed on Elizabeth, assessing, calculating. patient in the specific way of a man who has been waiting for years for this moment and finds it exactly as interesting as he expected. I've been looking forward to meeting the Moonsiever heir for quite some time. Roger stepped forward, put himself fully between them. The man's smile didn't move. You can't protect her from this, Roger. You never could. That's rather the point. His name was Caden Voss, elder ranked, 3 territories east. A man who had spent 20 years building influence through patience and careful distance, understanding that the most dangerous power is the kind no one thinks to trace back to you. He had been at every major council summit for 15 years, had voted with the majority on every significant motion, had never once been on the losing side of a decision, which was not luck. That was architecture. That was a man who built the outcome before he walked into the room. Roger had seen it 3 weeks ago at the summit and had filed it away without acting on it fast enough. He was done not acting. "Remove him," Roger said to his guards. Quiet. Absolute. "On what grounds," Voss said pleasantly, "does an alpha remove a ranked elder from a council proceeding?" Roger. He didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. "I have the correspondence, the payment records, the weaponsmith's testimony." A pause. "And the body of the courier you sent to my border when you realized she had survived." The pleasant expression stayed on Voss's face, but something behind it recalculated, the faint adjustment of a man revising his timeline. "You've been busy," he said. She deserved someone who was. The guards moved. Voss went without struggle. The composure of a man who had contingencies stacked several layers deep. At the door, he stopped, turned, and looked at Elizabeth with the patient, measuring expression he had worn since he walked in. Not angry, not desperate, interested. That was the part that stayed with her. "The bloodline doesn't end here," he said. "You know that, don't you?" Not a question, a statement from a man who had studied the Moonsever line far more deeply than anyone in this hall understood. "There are others who want what you carry. I was simply the first to move." He paused. "The next one won't be as patient as I was." Then he was gone. The hall exhaled. The elder moved first. He crossed to the pendant on the floor, lifted it with both hands in the formal gesture that meant received and witnessed, and turned to face the gallery with the expression of a man who has decided to be the one to clean up a mess he didn't make. What followed was methodical and complete. Grace's documentation was formally revoked. The contract was entered into council record. Elder Ashford's position was suspended pending full investigation. Grace stood through all of it without moving. When the gallery emptied, she didn't leave with it. She waited until the room was quiet. Then she looked at Elizabeth. "I wrote to my father 6 weeks before we left. I told him I couldn't do it." "I know," Elizabeth said. "I read it." Grace absorbed that. He wrote back. "I read that too." A silence that held 11 years of shared history settled between them. The campfires, the covered mistakes, the nights Grace had stood between Elizabeth and the pack elders and smiled and lied smoothly and well. All of it real, all of it burned. "I'm sorry," Grace said. The flat, true sound of someone saying the only words they have left, and knowing they aren't enough. Elizabeth held her gaze. "I know," she said. "That's the part I haven't figured out what to do with yet." It was the most honest thing she could offer. Grace received it and left. Elizabeth stood in the emptying hall and breathed. Her name was restored. Her bloodline was documented. Her wolf was steady and present and quiet in her chest in a way she hadn't felt since long before the snow. She reached for the pendant. Roger was there before she had taken 2 steps. He fell into step beside her, shoulder close to hers, his wolf warm and present through the bond. Not crowding, not managing, just there, in the way of someone who has decided where they are standing and has no intention of moving. She stopped, turned to face him. He looked at her the way he had looked at her since the bond opened, openly, without anything held back. The alpha present and the man equally present underneath, neither one hiding behind the other. She held the pendant out between them. "I carried this through everything. I am choosing where it lands." He took it, closed his fingers around it slowly, the dented edge pressing into his palm, the way it pressed into hers through 11 days of snow and sickness and uncertainty, and every moment she had chosen to hold on when letting go would have been easier. His wolf went utterly, completely quiet. She felt it through the bond, the deep exhale of an animal that had been searching for a decade and had finally, irreversibly, arrived. She stepped closer. He brought his forehead down to hers, slow and deliberate, giving her every moment to move away. She didn't move. His hand rose to the side of her face, careful and certain at once, his thumb resting against her cheekbone. "I pulled you out of the snow because my wolf would not let me leave you there." He paused. "I stayed because I didn't want to be anywhere else." Her wolf made the soft sound again, the one she had spent 5 chapters not having a word for. She did now. "Home," it said simply. She closed the last space between them. They rode north at midday. When they crossed into his territory, the sun was beginning to drop, painting the snow gold across the fields on either side of the road. Elizabeth watched it from the saddle and felt the bond settle deeper with every mile, like roots finding soil that had been waiting for them. His captain was waiting at the fortress gate. He looked at Elizabeth, at Roger, at the pendant at her throat, and the way Roger rode half a length closer to her than he rode to anyone else. "Luna," he said simply, and stepped aside. Sarah was at the top of the steps. She said nothing, but she pressed Elizabeth's hand once, firmly, as she passed. The quiet gesture of a woman who had sent a message south 11 days ago, received no answer, and had understood then which way this would have to go. The fortress felt different that night. Warmer. The wolves in the lower hall were quieter at dinner, the particular settled quiet of a pack whose alpha has stopped carrying something alone. They felt it the way wolves feel everything important, not in words, in the air, in the way the alpha sat at the table with his shoulder turned slightly toward the woman beside him, in the way his wolf had finally, after 10 long years, stopped pacing. 6 months later, Elizabeth stood at the war table with the pendant on the wall where the maps were, and felt the bond stir in a direction that wasn't Roger. Outward. Southward. Not warm the way Roger felt through the bond, not steady. This was something else, something younger. Frightened. Reaching outward with the blind, desperate urgency of someone who does not yet know what they are, but can feel, somewhere in their blood, that there is someone who does. Her wolf was on her feet instantly. Not a threat. A call. Elizabeth had read enough of the Moonsever records in the restricted archive to understand what this meant. The bloodline didn't just live in one person. It recognized itself. It reached across distance toward the nearest anchor when it was frightened, or in danger, or simply lost and looking for something solid to hold on to. Someone out there was carrying something they didn't understand, and they were afraid. She pressed her hand flat against the table, looked up. Roger was watching her from the doorway. He had been watching for 30 seconds, she realized. Waiting. He had felt the shift in the bond too, the small southward pull, the change in her wolf's attention. He hadn't said anything. He had waited for her to name it. She loved him for that more than she could easily say. "There's someone," she said. "South. Young, I think. Scared." She paused. "They don't know what they are yet." His eyes moved to the maps, to the southern routes, to the distance. "Like you," he said, quietly. Not a question. "Like I was," she said. "Before. Before the snow. Before the pendant. Before the night a man followed his wolf into the dark and pulled her out of it." She was not that person anymore. She knew what she carried. She knew what it meant. And she understood now, standing at this table, in this fortress, with this bond warm and steady in her chest, that the Moonsever line was not just a bloodline to be protected. It was a responsibility. There was someone out there, young and frightened and completely alone, carrying something powerful they didn't understand, with no one to tell them the truth, with no one coming, the way there had been no one coming for her, until there was. Roger crossed to the table, his shoulders settled against hers, warm and solid, his wolf steady beside her own. He looked at the maps. "How far?" he said. 3 days south, maybe 4. "And whoever is with them?" She paused, because there was something else in the pull, something underneath the fear, something colder and more deliberate circling the edges of that young, frightened signal, like a wolf circling a fire. Someone had already found them, someone who knew exactly what they were. "We need to move fast," she said. Roger didn't ask more questions. He looked at the maps for 3 more seconds, then stepped back from the table. "I'll have horses ready within the hour," he said. She was already reaching for her coat. 30 minutes, she said. His wolf pressed forward through the bond, warm and ready and completely aligned with hers. "Together," it said simply. "Together," hers answered. She put the coat on and walked toward the door and did not look back, because everything she needed was already moving beside her. Outside, the snow had begun to fall again. South of the border, in a place neither of them had been yet, someone who didn't know their own name yet was running out of time. Elizabeth pulled the coat tighter and kept moving. She knew what it felt like to be left in the snow. She did not intend for anyone else to learn that the same way she had.